the scream arrived before the man did. It tore across the wet morning air of Fort Bragg's Special Forces Assessment and Selection Course like a physical thing, like a pressure wave that made the nearest candidates flinch and step back without even meaning to. "Get off my course!" Drill Sergeant First Class Raymond Kovacs had a voice that didn't carry. It detonated. 22 years of breaking men down and building them back up had given him a register that bypassed the ears entirely and vibrated somewhere deep in the chest cavity. He was a large man, not just in height, but in presence, the kind of man who seemed to occupy slightly more space than his body actually required. His uniform was immaculate. His campaign cover pulled so low it shadowed his eyes, leaving only the hard line of his jaw visible beneath it. He was standing 6 inches from the face of Warrant Officer First Class Diana Cole. "I don't know what soft evaluation board let you through the gate," he snarled, his voice dropping to something more dangerous than a shout. A cold, controlled contempt. "But this is SFAS, Special Forces Assessment and Selection. Not a yoga class, not a fun run. This is the place where we find out if a person is built for the work or built for excuses." He let that land. Around them, 18 candidates stood in a loose semicircle in the grey pre-dawn, their breath fogging in the November cold, their legs and shoulders burning from the 12-mile ruck march that had just ended. They were watching with the exhausted, calculating eyes of people who understood that someone else's humiliation was, at least temporarily, a relief from their own suffering. Diana Cole did not move. She stood with her ruck still on her back, 65 pounds of wet gear, and she did not set it down. She did not shift her weight. She did not blink at an unusual rate or swallow or do any of the 100 small, involuntary things that people do when they are afraid. She simply stood, her eyes fixed on a point approximately 2 inches above Kovacs' left shoulder, her breathing slow and even as a metronome, her face a wall of absolute professional neutrality. She was 39 years old. In a group of candidates whose average age was 26, this was apparently the original sin. If you believe that real experience never announces itself, type quiet professional in the comments. Kovacs had noticed her the moment she checked in at the assessment station 48 hours ago, not because she had done anything wrong. In fact, she had done everything precisely right. Her paperwork in perfect order, her equipment immaculate, her physical screening numbers clean and unremarkable. She had answered every question with 2 words or fewer and had somehow managed to occupy negative space, to be present and simultaneously invisible, which in itself should have told him something. But Raymond Kovacs was a man who trusted the framework. The framework was built on observable data, age, size, the raw measurable output of a human body under controlled duress. By every metric he trusted, this woman should not be here. She was small, compact, and quiet in a world that rewarded volume and mass. She was approaching 40 in a course designed to destroy men in their prime. He had made his assessment on day 1 and had not revisited it. That was his first mistake. His second was this morning. The ruck march had ended. The candidates had come in across a span of 40 minutes, strung out along the trail in order of their suffering. They had arrived red-faced, bent forward, trading desperate private negotiations with their own bodies. 3 had dropped. 1 had been evacuated with a stress fracture. Diana Cole had come in 4th overall, not 4th among the women. There were no other women. 4th among all 18 remaining candidates, carrying the same weight as the men 6 inches taller and 40 pounds. Heavier than her, in a time that would have been competitive at a course 10 years younger than this one. Kovacs had seen the number on the sheet and had chosen not to update his conclusion. Instead, he had constructed an explanation. A good day, a forgiving trail, beginner's adrenaline. He had come out here to find the crack in her, to expose the luck for what he believed it was. He had been standing in her face for 3 minutes now. There was no crack. This infuriated him. "You think silence is strength?" he demanded, dropping his voice so only she could hear it, the words like gravel shifting under a boot. "Because from where I'm standing, silence is what people do when they have nothing worth saying," You have nothing here, warrant officer. You have a folder full of administrative postings and a body that has no business on this terrain. The kindest thing I can do, the most professional, most humane thing, is to tell you to pick up your bag, walk to that white van at the gate, and save yourself the injury that is absolutely coming. A beat of silence. The candidates around them held their collective breath. Diana Cole's eyes moved for the first time from the fixed middle distance and found his. Her gaze was not defiant. It was not angry. It was something far more unsettling than either of those things. It was patient. It was the gaze of a person who has waited a very long time in very dark and very dangerous places, and for whom this moment, this cold field, this loud man, registered somewhere below the threshold of things worth responding to emotionally. She said very quietly, "Request permission to continue the course, Sergeant." Kovac felt something he hadn't felt in years. He felt uncertain. He crushed it immediately. "Denied," he said. "Pack your gear." What followed was the kind of bureaucratic confrontation that the military does with a particular and exhausting thoroughness. Diana Cole did not leave. She requested, through the correct channels and in the correct sequence, a formal review of the dismissal order. This was her right under assessment protocol, a provision designed for exactly this kind of situation. It was rarely invoked because it required a level of composure and institutional knowledge that most candidates under that kind of pressure simply didn't possess. She possessed it. Kovac found himself in the cadre building 40 minutes later, across a metal table from a woman who had just completed a 12-mile ruck march and looked somehow less tired than he did. Her request form was filled out in handwriting so precise it looked typeset. Every field, every regulation citation. Correct. He read it twice, looking for the error that would let him end this cleanly. There was no error. "You understand," he said, setting the form down, "that even if I allow you to continue, the course gets harder from here, significantly harder. What you've done in the last 48 hours is the orientation. The actual selection begins at 400 tomorrow." "I know what begins at 400, she said. Something in her tone, not arrogance, but a certainty so deep it had stopped needing to perform, made him pause. "How?" he said. "How do you know?" She looked at him steadily. "Because I helped write the schedule, Sergeant." The room went very quiet. Kovac set down his pen. The call to the Special Warfare Center's personnel office took 11 minutes. The records check took 4. The officer on the other end of the line, a young captain named Flores, read the summary with the careful, slightly stunned diction of a person encountering information that did not fit any category they had prepared for. "Warrant Officer First Class Diana Cole," Captain Flores began, "formally attached to 1st Special Forces Operational Detachment Delta, current assignment." A pause. "Sir, her current assignment is listed as Special Forces Qualification Course, Curriculum Development and Assessment Architecture. She's on temporary duty assignment to SFAS as an independent evaluator under a program run directly out of USACOM." Kovac was standing very still. "She's not a candidate," Flores continued. "Technically, she's embedded as a candidate for course integrity evaluation. It's a program designed to assess whether the selection process contains systemic bias in its elimination criteria." Another pause. "Sir, her personnel jacket it's substantial." "Read it," Kovac said. His voice had changed. It was flat now. Careful. "Combat deployments. 14. Primary specialty. Special Forces Intelligence Sergeant. 18 Delta, cross-trained. Secondary specialty, CRE instructor, level C, advanced course completion, military freefall, combat diver, special operations target interdiction." Flores stopped. "Sir, she holds a master instructor designation from the JFK Special Warfare Center. The SFAS Physical Standards Assessment, the current one, the fitness benchmarks that your candidates are being held to right now." Another pause, longer this time. "She developed them," Kovac said. It was not a question. She co-authored them 6 years ago. along with the land navigation scoring rubric and the stress inoculation protocol for Phase 2. Flores's voice had taken on a reverent, slightly disbelieving quality. Sergeant Kovac, the reason she knew what begins at 0400 is because she's the one who decided what begins at 0400. Kovac sat down slowly in his metal chair. Outside the window, the morning had brightened. The field was empty now, the candidates released to their brief rest period. On the far edge of the training area, a single figure was visible, still in full kit, ruck still on her back, moving through a deliberate series of stretches with the unhurried precision of someone who has learned to treat recovery as a discipline rather than a luxury. He watched her for a long moment. 22 years. He had spent 22 years believing that the ability to evaluate a warrior was among the most finely developed of his skills. He had believed he could see competence, could read it in the way a person moved and breathed and held themselves under pressure. He had been right, more often than not. That was the most dangerous kind of wrong. He had seen all of those things in Diana Cole, the balanced stance, the controlled breathing, the stillness under direct assault. He had seen every signal his training had taught him to read, and he had overridden them all because of a number on a personnel form and the story he had already decided to tell. If you believe that the most dangerous assumption is the one you make before the evidence arrives, type earned in the comments. He found her at the edge of the field. She had set the ruck down and was going through a weapons maintenance checklist on a sidearm with the automatic, unconscious fluency of someone for whom this was less a task than a habit, like the way a musician's hands find scales without thinking. He stopped 2 feet away. He didn't have a script for this. He had spent 22 years being the person who set the terms of every conversation on this field. He had no architecture for standing on the other side. "Warrant Officer Cole," he said. She looked up. "I owe you a correction," he said. The words were not easy. They were not supposed to be. "I made an assessment of your capability based on factors that had nothing to do with your capability. I was wrong, and I said things on that field, in front of your peers, that were inappropriate and unprofessional." He paused. "That won't happen again." She studied him for a moment. There was no triumph in her expression, no satisfaction, none of the small, visible pleasure that people allow themselves when someone who has wronged them is finally forced to account for it. She simply looked at him the way she had looked at him all morning, with a patience that felt geological, like it had been formed over a very long time, under very significant pressure. "I've been dismissed off 14 different courses," she said, her voice even and unhurried, "by 14 different instructors. Some were younger than you, some were older. All of them had made their decision before I cleared the gate." She picked up the sidearm, checked the chamber, and holstered it. "I stopped being angry about it a long time ago. Anger costs energy, and I needed the energy." "For the mission," he said. "For proving the data," she said. "Every course I've been dismissed from I've documented. The criteria used, the timing of the dismissal, whether it occurred before or after a measurable performance event, 6 years of data. That's what the curriculum revision is built on." She looked at him with those patient, unreadable eyes. "You just added to it, Sergeant. The dismissal order came before any assessed failure. That's the pattern." Kovac was quiet for a long moment. "What happens with the data?" he said. "It changes the course," she said simply. "So the next one doesn't get dismissed before she gets to fail on her own terms." The cadre assembled at 0345 the following morning for the Phase 2 brief. Sergeant Major Ellis, the SFAS commandant, stood at the front of the room. He was a man whose entire career had been a study in economy of movement, of words, of visible emotion. He spoke rarely, and when he spoke, rooms recalibrated. "Before we begin," he said, "I want to address what happened on this field yesterday morning." The cadre went still. "Some of you witnessed it. All of you have heard about it by now." He let the silence do its work. "A member of this cadre dismissed a candidate from this course prior to any assessed performance failure on the basis of factors unrelated to the selection criteria. That candidate is Warrant Officer First Class Diana Cole, who is here in an official capacity from USOCOM to evaluate the integrity of this program. He paused. She is also, for the record, the most qualified person on this installation, including myself. He turned and looked at the door. Diana Cole stood in the frame in full kit, her expression the same still, neutral mask she had worn from the beginning. Sergeant Major Ellis came to attention, sharp, clean, total. He raised his hand in a salute that held, not the brief, functional gesture of daily military courtesy, but the full, sustained salute reserved for a very specific kind of recognition. "Warrant Officer Cole," he said, "on behalf of this command, I apologize for yesterday. It will not be reflected in your evaluation report, and it will not happen again at this installation." Behind him, one by one, the cadre followed. Kovac was last. His salute, when it came, was the most precise of all of them, held the longest, the knuckles absolutely rigid. It cost him something. That was appropriate. Diana Cole looked at the assembled room for a moment. Then she returned the salute with the same quiet, complete professionalism she brought to everything else. "Thank you, Sergeant Major," she said. "Request permission to observe Phase 2. "Granted," he said. "And Warrant Officer." She paused in the doorway. "The course is better because of your work. Make sure the next generation knows that." Kovac requested a meeting with her before she departed the installation 3 days later. He didn't ask for absolution, he asked for education. He asked her to walk him through the data, to show him the specific decision points where assumption had contaminated assessment, to help him see the blind spots he had accumulated over 2 decades without ever knowing they were there. She spent 2 hours with him. She was a precise and patient teacher, which surprised him, and then it didn't, because patience was the most visible thing about her, and he had simply mislabeled it from the start. He implemented 3 changes to his intake protocol within the month. They were small, structural changes, the kind that don't get headlines but shift outcomes over time. He stopped conducting initial candidate assessments from memory and started requiring his cadre to document the observable evidence for any early evaluation before stating a conclusion. It seemed like a small thing. It changed everything. The course completion rate among non-standard candidates, older, smaller, non-typical physical profiles, increased by 31% over the following 2 years. He never told anyone why he made the changes. The data told the story well enough without him. Somewhere in a USOCOM report that almost no one would ever read, in a section on assessment integrity and selection equity, there was a footnote. It referenced a 48-hour embedded evaluation at Fort Bragg conducted by Warrant Officer First Class Diana Cole. It cited the dismissal incident, the timeline, the data. And in the margin of that page, in an office that most people didn't know existed, someone had written 3 words in blue pen. She was right. The loudest voice on the field is not always the most dangerous one. Sometimes the most dangerous voice is the one that says nothing, that simply does the work, records the evidence, and changes the architecture of the institution from the inside, one data point at a time. True competence does not need an audience. It needs only a standard, and the discipline to exceed it every single day, in silence, without applause, and without waiting for permission. For more stories where quiet competence rewrites the rules, subscribe to Unknown Heroine Tales.